welcome back to the Information Revolution. It's our first episode for a new year. So this is our podcast talking about information and those of us who work with it and how things are right now and where they might be going. And it seemed like a great opportunity in the new year to be talking about exactly that last bit of where are we going. And we've been talking about the people stuff for the last few episodes. So as part of that, uh, what do we need in the future? So what are the future skills required or capabilities required in information? Uh, I'm Michael Upton. I'm a director of Metataxis New Zealand, a little consulting company based in Wellington.
And I'm Judi Vernau. I'm also a director of Metataxis, based in Wellington. I'm an information architect.
And I'm Karl Melrose. I work for Castlepoint Systems based in Canberra. My views are my own. I'm also a Rimper ambassador, and I've been around the industry for a while.
So I wanted to just jump in at this point and say, if we're talking about skills for the future, then I think we need to at least kick around some ideas about what we think that future is going to look like, so we can then think about what the skills are that we're going to need for that. And I was thinking about it myself, and thinking it's quite hard to know, isn't it? Because things are changing at such a rapid pace. The technology is is changing all the time. So, what impact is that going to have on our ability to manage our information? It's been increasing exponentially for, as we know, for ever and ever. That's only going to get worse. So, there's going to be even more stuff to deal with. Hopefully, some of the technology can evolve to help us deal with that. There are some tools already like auto categorization and that sort of thing. So, yeah, how will that work? We need to think about exploiting the information, the data that we have. There's much more emphasis on data analysis and mining. And AI, and what does that mean then? Um, and I also just wondered, do we think our users are going to get more sophisticated? Or less somehow? I don't know. With all this huge amount of information, sometimes I think, will people just give up and not even try? I was looking through some figures yesterday, the usual stuff for my training course about hours lost in trying to find the information that you need. Um, can never find anything really bang up to date, but anyway, I think the figures are pretty grim. I particularly like the one about, um, 5 people show up to work, but only four of them are productive because the equivalent of the fifth person is out, trying to find stuff. But anyway, um, you know, what are we doing to help people? What kinds of tools are going to help them? Or is it tools? Or is it technology tools? Or is it kind of people skills that we need to help them? What is it? Don't know. Thoughts?
There's a lot in
Sorry,
there.
that was a bit of a ramble.
No, but it's a
But
good
No,
place
no,
to
it's all
start.
good.
I mean, I think we're addicted to speed. If there's anything that I'm completely convinced of, it's that people want things to go faster, and they always want things to go faster. And I think the current mess that we're in is really that, people are addicted to speed. And you know what? It's so much quicker to put something on their desktop than it is to, put it in an EDRMS system that takes them an additional 15 seconds per object.
Mm.
Um, so, I think we're just gonna need to focus on things that allow us to go faster. But the thing that really allows us to go faster is actually reducing the quantity of stuff that people deal with. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, a business system for
I
me is the textbook example of something that reduces the quantity of stuff that people have to deal with. As soon as you're dealing with structured data, you're dealing with constrained input. And
Yeah.
I think I can't see a future for records management that doesn't deal heavily in databases. I mean, we've ignored databases for the last 50 years, and that a whole industry has sprung up around the recording of information, in its context using business systems that we're not involved in. And I think over the next 20 years that's going to merge, because I think it just has to, and lots of people that we all know who are running really good information management programs are seeing that the limitation to their program is actually that they start to run into all kinds of information governance issues that are actually created by stuff in databases and business systems. And because there's still this artificial and nonsensical wall between
Yeah,
information and data, which a business system presents
yeah.
information in context to people. Look, it's practically a business system practically presents
Makes no
people with the
sense.
definition of a record. um,
Yeah, I think. Sorry, just to
and
jump
get
in
me
there,
off
like
the
one
rant.
example that I always. No, no, no. One thing that I always pull out in terms of that is to do with thinking about HR systems and the shift of employee records from things that were paper-based files to structured data and systems, and normally with supporting objects like documents is what I mean by an object there. But it's an absolutely crystal clear example of where the sort of formats and structures of the information have shifted over time, but surely the actual thing and its informational value and what you want to do with it hasn't changed. It's a
Mm.
personnel file. It's still a personnel file, but now it's a line of business system. And I 100% agree with you, Carl, that I think that this kind of I would hope that in information and records that we do not create any distinction between those things, because to some extent it's not our business. It's not my business to say I'm super duper data management expert. Like that's a kind of a they won't want me to say this, but that's kind of a subset of managing information is knowing what you do specifically with data and how you make data go faster, as you say, and and like be efficient and be useful and all that yang. And I think where it will hit us is that I feel like we're going to have to increasingly care about. I guess it's kind of workflow and it kind of connects to process, but I think that will translate into kind of user interface design. Like, how do I, as a person, create and maintain great records through a system interface? Like how does this input um, achieve the right outcomes in terms of the information. It's kind of accuracy, it's sufficiency in terms of is it enough stuff, and any other kind of measure of quality you want to put on it. So I think that's one thing that's definitely on my mind, and I see that happening. I see teams of people working on how do you get information to where it should be. And I think that will increase over time. And I think that um, that might be wrapped around documents. So it might be about how do I get this file that I've been working on into sort of its context, I suppose. So for example, how do I upload this new letter to this employee file, to go back to that example? But I think it will also be a purely data-based thing as well. So basically forms, like how do I complete all this information about, like real basic examples would be sort of customer transactional stuff of, someone came in to ask me something at my government agency or my council or whatever, and I captured the record of what they said. I think if things are going well, then I think that will be where we are as information folks, and I think that relates to architecture and it relates to information management in a kind of looser, less architectural sense too.
No, very, very much around the information architecture, if I've understood you correctly. So, creating the environment that allows people to capture stuff in a reasonably structured way that can then be used and reused and so on.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I think
Yeah.
that so it's the what I think will increasingly shift is not just architecting it in the conceptual sense of understanding what a good model would look like, and what is it that we need to know about, and how could we reuse that, and what are our requirements for reusing that, but also what does that damn thing look like in this particular software that we're working with. Um,
Yeah, and I was wondering whether um, there's an increasing role for curation, therefore. So people there who are monitoring what's there and making sure that, as you said, the stuff is going to the right people in the right format. I don't quite know what I mean by that, but there seems to have been an increasing amount of thought around that
Yeah,
lately.
yeah. Well, yeah, and so that was actually the second kind of key thing that was in my mind
Oh,
was following from what you said about the future with increasing volumes, and I agree. I mean, well, who couldn't agree, whether or not we like that to be true? There's going to be increasing volumes of information coming through. Um, I imagine it'll continue to um, kind of a negative word, but fragment in the sense of the information is going to come through in many, many ways, different kinds of apps and different ways of faffing about.
mm, mm,
That whole increased thing for just kind of bringing your home view of the world into your workplace and going, hey, I want to use these apps. I think that will keep coming. And what I think a reasonable response to that would be is that whole thing of, we all know now that information's not all equal and that we want to treat things to different sort of standards. And that's kind of what appraisal has always been about. But bringing appraisal, um, I'm not meaning appraisal from only one perspective, which is in terms of that kind of
mm.
long-term archival view. I'm just meaning appraising the value of the information
Appraisal as per
Yeah.
from
Section 7 of
any.
ISO 15489, all of our favourite section of ISO
Yeah,
15489.
that's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah. I think basically appraisal, and bringing that into the contemporary context of
Yeah.
just working day to day. I think that will be absolutely
I think
critical, and
that's
I
what I
think that
mean by
really is.
curation. Yeah.
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah, snap. I was just going to say exactly that. I reckon that's probably exactly what it is. It's
Mm,
about going, well, which bits do we actually need to give a crap about, and what is all the stuff that we are not giving a crap about? Like, this goes all the way back to, I think, probably the first episode of our podcast. We were talking about, knowing what you got. Yeah, I think it will be essential to understand what you're sort of disregarding from a quality perspective and going, all right, that stuff's fine. But I think it's long struck me that I think part of what people stress out about currently with the increase in digital information is um, possibly mistakenly thinking they need to treat everything as if it was the stuff that traditionally would go on a lovely curated file, and that's not right. You want a
mm,
subset of things to end up there and to treat them to a certain standard, but you want to know what is that subset and what looks good, what do you need, and what are all the skills around that and making that work.
mm,
Yeah,
Well, I mean,
mm.
there's also, I think, a question of who pays for that too, because the problem with curation is that it's expensive and time consuming. And,
sure.
this is, yeah, like I think there's lots of stuff in here. One of the underlying assumptions that I think we've all made implicitly is that the technology is basically going to be similar to what we've done in the past. And this is something that I've been thinking about recently when it comes to records management, because, you look at records management, and, it says the field of management responsible for the efficient and systematic control, and I could never remember the rest of the definition. But the first part, it deals with the efficient and systematic control of creation. And I was thinking about this recently, and I don't know anyone who is efficiently and systematically controlling the creation of records. I know a couple of practitioners in records management who are right there at the point where someone's got something in their head and they say, right, now we have to control the creation of the, the artifact or the entry in a system out of that, the record. We have to control the recording of that information so that we can then do stuff with it. But I mean, it hit me that what we're mostly doing is we're still mostly controlling the creation of registry entries about stuff that other people have created. And I'm
Right.
now stuck in
Interesting.
this loop where I'm trying to think about, are we still really actually running registry offices? We just have a bigger workforce. And I almost
Mm.
can't unsee that pattern now that I'm there. Um, but I think I think what that's highlighting to me though too is that what we're doing now feels like it's a lot different. But what it really is it's a bunch of technologies that have got cheaper. And so, it used to cost you $20 of time to send a letter to someone. Well, now you can send an email. But, we're still really creating an object and, sending it to someone. Like, it's a very, very old technology that we've brought into an electronic world. And I think that I can't see what the future of that is, because I'm constrained by having grown up in and remembering what it's like to send letters to people. And now I'm constrained by email being the only the next logical step for that. But I feel like some of those things are going to fundamentally change. And, we've been sort of talking about exchange formats and those sorts of things with, HTML and XHTML, XML and, et cetera for years. But I think that system to system piece is just going to keep on getting bigger and bigger. The other thing that I think is going to be different too is that, I think we've had the, let's call it democratization of lots of different types of software over the last 20 years. But I think particularly with some of the stuff that I'm seeing around natural language processing and AI, language is really particular to organizations. And I think what we're going to see is a lot of AI type tech springing up that's going to deal with specific organizational contexts. And I think we might actually start to see again that there are big gains to be made, but there's also a big capital investment that needs to be made. And so I think we may actually start to see the opposite, that, all of a sudden the tools we've got at home, aren't as good as the tools we can get access to at work again. And I think that's an interesting future. I'm not quite sure what a lot of these AI tools are going to do. Classification is the first problem to be solved in all of this stuff, because if you can accurately classify what something is, then you can start to make routing decisions about it. That's actually the problem we've got with email. The problem we've got with email at the moment is that, you get a shared mailbox where people can send generic requests, and you need a human sitting on that mailbox, because a human is the only person who's actually capable of, sitting down and saying, is there sufficient information, in this email for me? And if I take this email and my understanding of organizational context, do I have sufficient information and knowledge here to be able to classify this email according to what it actually wants, and then route it appropriately?
Well, you don't necessarily, because I have worked on systems that automatically route, as you would say, route, as I would say, emails to, I was going to say, the appropriate department. I mean, obviously they get it wrong quite a bit. But I mean, quite a long time ago, I was working for a county council where we did that. We automatically categorized even the scanned stuff that came in, and then it got automatically routed to the department that it seemed was the appropriate one. If it wasn't, then they rerouted it. But it was right so much that it really saved time. And these tools are getting better all the time.
And surely that will be the near future with kind of stuff that's been called AI. I get grumpy about that
I
phrase,
know.
anyway.
Look, it's a really
I agree.
loaded term, and so often it gets used to describe really simple algorithms that it looks intelligent when you're routing 500,000 emails a day, but it's really not smart. The comment I'd make on the email front is that I work with organizations that are doing as much automatic routing as they can. And, there's still a friend of mine at a council on the south coast of Sydney who, they have 5 full-time officers employed there, literally just watching the council at mailbox and routing the email out of it. And they've done all of the easy stuff, and they've looked at all of and when I say easy stuff, I mean keyword based stuff and all those kinds of things. And they've had a couple of partners in to test AI type stuff, and they've still got 5 people sitting on this, which is $500,000 a year routing email.
It's a lot.
So
a lot, yeah.
$500,000 a year. Now, I mean, somebody said big investment to try and put these things in place, which is true. But if you're spending $500,000 a year, I think you could, there are easier ways of doing it,
versus
or rather
OpEx game, but
cheaper. Exactly.
But you say there are easier and cheaper ways, but honestly, I've worked with them, and I know the other things that they've tried. They've tried all of the things that should solve this problem, and they just can't, because the technology just it actually just isn't. It's not there yet. So or at least the
So
technology that can solve it, and of course, if you want to develop a full organizational ontology and develop all your terms and everything else, but,
Yeah,
I know,
which is
which is
what I'm
exactly what
thinking
you're
of.
thinking of.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen some people do that with different things. And I mean, it's a expensive multi-year process, and maybe there is a payoff
Yeah.
for it, but it's still I think it gets to that point where it's a big enough project and it's high risk enough that, risk from if we allocate capital to this, is it going to work? I think there's still enough uncertainty there that people aren't
yeah,
doing it.
is it going to deliver?
Yeah. Which is a
Yeah.
shame.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's fair. Mm,
Yes, you're right. And I think that although I'm just thinking about experience in New Zealand, some government departments have invested quite a lot up front. They haven't, if I can say this, quite had I don't know. I don't want to say courage because that's really unfair, but they haven't been in a situation where they could continue to see that through to get the benefits down the road.
I think there's actually a general
yeah,
problem in government too of nobody wants to do benefits realisation.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's
It's I
true.
mean, it's a well
Yeah, well,
known thing, I
trodden
think.
path, I think,
Yeah,
that one.
and it's a pain. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I want to jump back a mile.
Yeah, to the thing we were going
um,
to focus on, skills.
Yeah.
well,
Yep. 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 Yep.
I just wanted to point out. So, Carl, you were talking about kind of yeah, great stuff about whether or not a bunch of records workers essentially managing a registry that describes stuff that's already been created. And I think what I'm saying in my kind of key push about that idea of kind of building front ends and building workflows and building ways that people capture records is exactly that shift, is that I am seeing now, and specifically thinking, to be honest, Microsoft 365. I mean, it could be any technology, but I'm seeing people, information teams who are out there building ways of capturing records that meet everyone's needs or try and meet everyone's needs. And so I think that's really a concrete example of what's in my mind in terms of how I see things shifting. I do think information teams will need to be, yes, doing information architecture, and yes, then implementing that in terms of building stuff out. And I hope that that is kind of what um, how appraisal is implemented, I suppose, is that it's not about how do we shuffle around the stuff that we've already got. It's actually how do we make sure that we capture the bits that matter to us and
Mm.
to the
Mm.
standard that matters. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Yes.
appraisal
So
Yes, that's
appraisal
right.
is all about
Yeah.
business risk, right? And
sure.
I mean, I think I think there's got to be a recognition there that
Well, should be.
well, yeah, it should be exactly. Yeah, I mean, the ISO. I always go back
Yeah.
to ISO because I really like that definition, but it's not really a definition. It's a very long paragraph that you've got to read between the lines of. But I always go back to that because I think everything is in there. But I think the problem is that I don't think people look at performance as a business risk. And this is actually a problem this is a general incentives problem with government. I mean, if you're in a commercial business and you've got a process that's costing you $200 because somebody's handwriting something and then putting it in a tray and waiting for someone to pick it up, that's kind of okay in government. Whereas no commercial business would tolerate that because they'd go broke.
No.
And so, I think
Yeah.
we've got to think about that. And that's actually, core to one of the things the skill transitions that I think we need to make. I think we need to get much, much earlier in the process, which means that I think a lot of us are going to have to become much closer to being business analysts than we ever have
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
The point you make about Microsoft 365 is perfect. We all have some mutual friends who are doing extremely well with their organizations, just helping them create lists and those sorts of things to manage assets in the organizations that they're in. And I mean, a list is a registry. Like, it's a technology as old as it's an electronic version of something that's as old as the hills.
100%.
But I mean, I think, it's almost like it's the two BAs for me. So it's business analysis, because we're going to have to become system builders and we are going to have to deal with structured data. But it's also business administrators. And, business administrators in the masters of business administration type way of thinking about the world. And I don't think this is a new thing either. I remember reading, it's one of David Bierman's papers from the 80s. And in it, he quotes the records manager for, and it's like one of the railway companies in the US that's talking about stuff in the 50s. And this guy says, look, a records manager is basically a business administrator. And the historical context of business administration is not is not admin people doing admin work. Business administration is all about how you run a business, how you administer a business. It's the chief executive. It's those people. It's dealing with capital allocation decisions and process decisions and those kinds of things. And he says that a records manager is basically a business administrator, and an archivist is more like a historian. And I think that one of the things that's happened is that the historians have crept into the records management profession, and the business administration's gone out of it. And I think that's only something that's
that's a good
I think it's
analogy.
only something that's happened
Interesting.
since we've had all of the archival authorities. And I made a mistake talking to someone, archival institutions. It's the archival authorities in government that I think have really pushed that shift. But I think we need to bring back the business administration, because I think it's the only way really that records and information management can stand on its own. If it can be a business and a profit center and seriously responsible for the improved performance of the organization all the time, I mean, that's something you throw money at,
So as well as having a national archives, what we need is a national business administration agency or something.
Maybe.
Well, I mean, if you have a look all over Australia and New Zealand, they keep trying to do something like that. But the problem is that they keep trying to do it by appointing a government CIO. And, we've talked about the problem of government CIOs not really being information people, but being tech people. And, they go in and they talk about, the vision for government and cloud. And honestly, who cares? Like, who cares where the tin is and who owns it,
Yeah.
In New Zealand, you have this digital services function that's supposed to, be about central government's delivery of digital services, and just information does not get a look in whatsoever there.
Yeah.
Victor Dominello.
And then you've got statisticians, you've got the data, they're going to come through and they're going to run things. They're going to take over, I think, the data stewardship concept coming out of Statistics New Zealand, not out of Archives New Zealand. I think they're gonna push changes to business practice.
That'll be interesting to see.
Yes.
And I think I'm conscious of the time, but what I would say is that those kinds of shifts happening at that sort of upper level, or thinking across government, I think they say something about how information management needs to change if it wants to continue, really. It's like, don't get sidelined by people using the word data, don't get sidelined by the IT folks,
But
find a way
focus
forward.
on the business issue. I mean, Victor Dominello in New South Wales, I forget what he's the minister for, but he's done more for information management, I think, than anybody else in a really long time. And he's focused on things like problems with digital driver's licenses and those sorts of things. And he's solving these core big challenges in lots of places where a process takes a long period of time and has a lot of documentation associated with it. I'm the number of times over the last 5 years or so where I'll open LinkedIn in the morning and there's Victor Dominello trying to hold up all of the forms that you have to fill out to achieve something in government, and like he's got this wide-eyed look like, what the hell? And then he goes and does something about it. And it's an information management challenge. It's government needs to have all this information in order to deal with you. So how do we make giving that information to government, to a government agency, something that is streamlined and easy and fast? Management is somewhere that people, particularly in records and information management, can gain a lot too. One of the big challenges that I think records and information management have in organizations is actually having their organizations understand what they do and what they're there for. And I actually think that there's a lot of problems for records and information management and managers understanding what they do and what they're there for. And I think that there's a certain level of discipline that comes with taking a service management approach, putting and this is, sort of like IT service management, putting a service catalog together, having service definitions, and the natural point to go to from there really is, well, who decides what your service is for? Oh, I just got disconnected. Who decides what your service is for? Well, the people who are buying that service do. And, if you start to take on some more of those service management disciplines, like having a service desk, where you take requests on your service catalog so that, you can actually start to understand what's the demand for these services, and you can change the way you deploy your resources so that, you're putting your resources in those services that are being demanded. I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff there that people in records can really learn from, because I don't think people in organizations really understand records. And I think too that some of the stuff that's crept into records over the last, well, actually it's been there longer term, but things like processing the mail, I mean, why is that a records management thing? Why isn't that customer service, or some kind of administrative function, or something like that? Why is that a records management thing? That's a registration.
It often isn't actually in
Yeah,
the
I was gonna.
UK. Yeah, I don't know about, yeah. It's in
It's not.
fact, it's in my experience, it usually isn't anything to do with the records managers. But I was going to say, so what are the skills then that we think people need? I mean, the service desk um, idea, I think we were discussing that a few weeks ago, having people who are being more responsible to what people need, being there to say, hey, we can help you with that,
Yeah, yeah.
those kinds of ideas. So in those terms, then the business analysis skills is right, because you've got to understand what it is that people are asking, but you've also got to have those really good people skills to encourage people to ask and be able to elicit from them what it is they really need, and be able to think that through and come up with good solutions. So I think, yeah, business analyst skills, but also, yeah, those real people skills, talking to people so people trust you as well, is going to be
Mm-mm-mm.
really, or always is really important, just from that aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking on that point that um, I normally would make a distinction between kind of skills and knowledge, right? Like, what do you need to know versus what are you able to do? But I was
Right.
actually thinking, like, one thing that I think is worth saying out loud is that I feel like there'd be some beneficial mindset shifts towards that kind of idea of like, right, how do I, um, oh gosh, I'm going to use all the terrible phrases like put the person at the center of what I'm doing and, all that kind of stuff, like how do I and make sure that basically the person I'm talking to doesn't feel like I'm either patronizing them or telling them off,
Exactly.
or, any of those negative
Exactly.
experiences that I think can be
Yeah.
quite possible. And I see heaps and heaps of people who are really good at that stuff. But I think that will continue to be really necessary. And I think for those people who don't have that mindset and perhaps more like, how do I keep my perfect system humming, which, I think is another kind of stereotype of sort of information and records people. Things would be fine if the users didn't keep coming and stuffing it up for me. I think those people have to either change or need to be um, put in the background. Basically, you need to be clear on who does what. Yeah.
There's something that's just occurred to me while you're saying that, actually, and I think what I've been trying to express is that I think there's an and I think it tailors in with what both of you have been saying as well. I think there's a need to to possibly stop looking at records management as a technical discipline, and start thinking about it as what we actually have here is we have the intersection of business management and service management. And we kind of need to think about records as being a business and a service. And if it's a business, that has to create customers, and it's a service, it has to serve people. I think that the sort of
Hmm.
skills shake out, the skills and things we need shake out of that quite naturally. Because, the biggest thing I see in records is going to disappear if it can't start winning some funding battles. And I had somebody message me the other day about my blog on LinkedIn saying that they just basically words to the effect of they were just stepping in now to take over from a records team that had evaporated. And, their view was that the records team focused too much on compliance. Now, that records management team is now a data management team under a data management lead. And,
Go.
I mean, I think a lot of this stuff comes down to funding and, whether people are providing a service that people actually want to consume. And someone that we all know and I were having a chat about thinking about information products about 6 months ago. There's a great book I've got on my shelf that I haven't quite got to yet, it's by Elizabeth Orner. It's called Making Knowledge Visible. And it's all about
Oh yeah,
developing. She's great.
yeah,
It's all about
yeah,
developing
she is. Yeah.
information product. And that product idea is just something I've been chewing on for a long time, because I think we all have to think about, if the records our organization is producing were a product, would people buy them? And how much could you sell them for? And I don't mean sell on the open market. I mean, I think there's a lot of. I think the reason that a lot of the business thinking needs to come into records management is because records management and information management exist in a competitive landscape of ways to achieve a problem. Now, if you're taking your information
Solve the
products,
problem.
solve the
Yes.
problem. Thank you.
Solve a problem. Yeah.
um, But I mean, if you're thinking about an information as a product, well, if you're selling that to a person involved in the process, well, if they're making a $20 gain from getting your well-structured information, then the theory, the business, the economic theory is that they will pay up to like $19.99 in order to get that, because that's the value of that thing for them. But are we creating those things? And I don't know. But I think that we
Yeah,
have
it's
to be
great. It's
thinking
great.
about that.
It's really good fodder.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess what I'd say to try and keep kind of pushing the skills angle is, implicit in all of this is, first having the skills to identify problems and strategies for addressing them, but
Yeah.
then also being able to ask yourself clearly, well, okay, if I'm trying to get to point, from A to B, then how, what do I need to be able to do, or what resources are needed in my organization to get there? Yeah, and I actually think, like, one thing that's been on my mind is, we um, quite reasonably talk about kind of concerns about records teams evaporating and so forth, and who gets to step in and who does what. But I think if we can take concerns about sort of the industry and its title and who does what in terms of the names, the kind of work to be done is still clear. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I think, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to
No,
get
I
to the
think
actual kind of
the
concrete.
thing I think
I think the concrete
I
bit,
was just going to say, I think the thing
the
you're
concrete bit,
saying is that I think implicit in what I'm saying is that I'm talking out of a division between information and records management, and I've been arguing against that distinction. And I think what you've been just trying to say is exactly that. Stop arguing out of the distinction. It's all the work that has to be done.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I would see, for instance, data management and records as two sort of subsets or capabilities or
Definitely.
groupings of capabilities within managing
Definitely.
information. And I
Yeah.
guess what I was thinking in terms of a concrete skill is, I think, um, um, basically like bridge building and creating alliances and stuff across an organization. I think that's increasingly going to matter.
Mm.
I think it's going to be increasingly important to not be isolated within an organization. And I think, like, I also do want to say that that's something I've actually seen work really well in a lot of places in New Zealand. I see lots of positive stories around that, and I think it's going to continue. I think it's going to become more and more important.
So, do you think that the information managers need subject matter skills in order to be able to understand what's important to the organization and what isn't, and what needs to be curated and what can be left over there?
Yeah,
Or are they um, facilitators who know how to find that stuff out without
yeah.
being the subject matter themselves? I think I would argue the latter, but I'm interested to know what you think.
I'd lean towards the latter, and I would say that actually this is yet another angle on talking about appraisal, to appraise the value of information and let's say we're doing it from a business risk perspective, rather than from a heritage perspective, I need to go and work with people in order to understand the business. So I need to, as an
Yeah,
information
exactly.
manager, I need to get enough stuff out of other people's heads, out of
Yeah,
their expertise, and just basically go, what the hell does this organization do and what does it matter? Like,
yeah,
what if this process stops, or what if the records of this process are not available later, or yeah. And it's kind of those kind of real big BA things again. And I,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
guess the connection I would draw in my head is that um, some of those fundamental questions around appraising the value of information basically are business analysis, and they are also that kind of facilitating or people wrangling thing of like getting stuff out of the experts. And I think
Yeah.
what what came to me as you were asking those questions, Judi, is that I guess we can't be the one-stop shop. We can't try and be the experts in all things. And another example of a really classic, common kind of connections within organisations that I wouldn't say are information management, but are so related they may as well be. There'll be some kind of a legal function where corporate legal has all kinds of regulatory views on stuff that you need to account
Hmm.
for. And there will be, privacy people, privacy officers, and so on, who often are not part of an information management team, even if that information management team is genuinely more than records, even if it's true IM in the sense that it's tackling more than just records management. And those are exactly the kinds of alliances where it's like, well, we can't achieve everything. Like, what we're trying to do is understand the value of stuff, what matters, where's the risk, where's um, the quality, the specs that we need to meet, and then who do we need to work with to deliver on that. So I do think that will be an ongoing thing, and I do see that, yeah, some kind of facilitating. Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
interesting for me, and it's sort of implied underneath a lot of what you're saying, but when you said BA before, I immediately went to business administrator, because I think there's a lot of,
Mhm.
this is something I've been thinking about for a while. I think there's a lot of cost discipline problems,
Mhm.
in lots of the organizations that we deal with. And it's interesting because you can't get public servants to engage on lots of this stuff because what they do is more important than that. And it is, but, it fails on the underlying logic that, if it costs us $10,000 to service someone and you can bring that cost down to $5,000, you can service twice as many people and do twice as much good. And but I've been thinking along these lines for a while, and what I keep getting back to is the real discipline underneath records management generally. And I have a really expansive view of records, right? Anywhere you record information, that's records. So what everyone talks about is information and data management. I just see records, but it's all about organizing and managing work. And the calendar is the textbook one of those, right? How many calendar invites did it took us a couple of calendar invites to organize today? We created a set of records in order to get us here, and obviously we stuffed that up the first time around. I did. But we created a set of records to get us here, and I've been chewing on that for months because I kept thinking I'm about to put together a program on executive engagement, and it's something I've been wanting to do for about 2 years. But a lot of what it's actually about is getting records match fit so that it can be something that executives want to get involved in. And for a long time, I was thinking about it as the career trajectory of information managers should be up to the chief information officer. But I've actually swapped the way I think about that now, because the more I look at it, the more I think it's more like COO,
Right. Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's all
Hmm.
about
Yeah.
organizing and managing work. And if I look at what the biggest impact of record, poor records in an organization is, it's the organization is disorganized, and it costs too much to get stuff done. A lot, and the part of the organization that's going to bring that cost discipline and think about how we operate better is that COO function. And so I think there's something there. I don't quite know what it is, but looking at the end-to-end process.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's what they used to call operations management, wasn't it? Isn't it? OM. But what the organisation does, unless it's actually making widgets or cars or whatever it is, it's, as we've said before in these,
Mm.
it's all about creating and managing information, really,
Yeah.
and talking to people and getting ideas and that kind of stuff. It's all about the information. So managing that information is a totally integral part of managing the operation.
They're
It's
inseparable.
absolutely as crucial as the people.
It's the input,
Yeah.
it's the product,
100%.
it's the
Yeah, it's back to the
Yeah.
product, back
Mm-mm.
to the product. And for a lot of government departments, the information is the product.
and you know,
Actually,
you're highlighting a whole bunch of conversations I've had with a friend of mine who works for a department that does stuff with mining, and they don't operate any mines. They don't do anything like that. All they actually do is manage the information
no,
about mining claims. Someone applies, you know, they
exactly,
do go through an approval process.
Mm-mm.
That's
exactly.
actually the whole agency.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I mean, the tax office.
Brilliant. Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so a whole lot of that comes down to like where that becomes really tangible is basically, I think of managing entitlements and obligations. Like a whole lot of government stuff is keeping track of who's owed what, and and who has sort of an entitlement to something. And that
Yeah,
could
or
be
who's
about
allowed to
land,
do
that could be
something. Yep.
exactly. And all of that is a
So
record of
why are we
growth.
having to have this
Yep.
conversation then?
Absolutely.
Well, on that juicy note, I think we should actually wrap it
Yeah,
up because
Yeah.
we've gone deep. Yeah.
been a
But
pleasure, guys.
certainly
Really
something to
has.
come back to.
Very thought provoking.
Yeah, nice
Yes.
one. Yep. If anyone out there listening to this, we've obviously gone a bit long this time. If you have any other thoughts or questions or want to get involved in any way, then please get in touch with any of us. Yep. And thanks very much for listening. We'll catch you all next time.